The camera pans across a roaring stadium. Floodlights burn bright. Jerseys fly off the shelves. Broadcasters shout from Tokyo to Toronto. A billion eyes watch. But no one sees him, because he's not on the pitch, not in the commentary box, not in the viral clips or halftime ads. Yet without him, none of this exists. His name is Richard Scudamore. And if you love the Premier League, you owe him more than you know. For 20 years, he wasn't just an executive. He was the architect of modern football's biggest stage. He didn't score goals, he didn't lift trophies, but he gave the game its voice, its reach, its rhythm, its reign. Back in the early 1990s, English football was still licking its wounds from tragedy and scandal. Stadiums were rusting, TV deals were laughable, players earned a fraction of their worth. Fans were loyal, yes, but the rest of the world barely noticed. Richard noticed. He wasn't from football. He came from newspapers and business. A different breed entirely. But maybe that's what made him dangerous in the best way. He looked at football not just as tradition, but as untapped energy, as a sleeping empire. And when he took over as Premier League CEO in 1999, he didn't just inherit a league, he inherited a question. How do you turn national obsession into global religion? His answer wasn't a speech, it was a plan. What followed was a 2-decade masterclass in negotiation, vision and belief. From billion-pound broadcast rights to expanding into Asia, Africa, and America, Scudamore built something that even critics had to admire. But he didn't seek attention. In boardrooms, he was calm, measured, almost invisible. Yet when he spoke, entire clubs, networks, and governments listened. He was both the storm and the stillness, both the architect and the ghost. Some say football is for the players, others say it's for the fans. Scudamore believed it was for everyone, but only if you could find a way to make them care. So how did a former newspaperman reinvent the way the world watched football? How did he take a domestic league and turn it into a cultural powerhouse? And what kind of cost does a revolution like that demand? This isn't just a story about deals and dollars. It's about vision, about the quiet genius who stayed off the pitch, but changed everything on it. This is the story of Richard Scudamore. Before he stepped into the corridors of football power, Richard Scudamore was just another sharp mind in the publishing world. The man who would one day redefine global football started his career selling classified ads for Yellow Pages. It was a humble beginning, and yet, it offered something invaluable: the art of communication, negotiation, and above all, attention to value. Scudamore's journey from media to football might seem like a detour to some, but for him, it was evolution. In the early 1990s, while football clubs were still run like local shops, Scudamore was already thinking in global terms. His work at the British Printing Corporation, and later as managing director at Thomson, gave him exposure to managing brands, scaling operations, and dealing with high-pressure negotiations, skills that would become crucial when he entered the football world. In 1999, the Premier League appointed him as chief executive. The timing was perfect, or perhaps it was fate. The league was only 7 years old, still finding its identity. Manchester United were dominant, but the league lacked the marketing finesse, media sophistication, and international appeal that would define its future. It needed a business mind, not just a football fan. Richard didn't walk into football to preserve its traditions. He walked in to elevate them. He began with broadcasting. At the time, TV rights were important but not maximized. Under his leadership, the Premier League's media rights deals exploded in value. He struck record-breaking deals with Sky Sports and introduced overseas broadcasting packages, expanding the league's footprint far beyond the UK. By the time he stepped down, overseas rights were fetching billions and the Premier League was being broadcast in over 200 territories. But Scudamore wasn't just selling TV slots. He was selling emotion, the agony of a missed penalty, the ecstasy of a 90th-minute winner, the tribal pride of colors worn for generations. He knew that football wasn't just a game, it was theater, drama, identity, and it needed to be presented with the reverence and drama it deserved. Inside Premier League headquarters, Scudamore was known as a man of relentless focus. Colleagues say he had a mind for metrics and a heart for momentum. He could recite viewership figures and broadcast clauses like poetry. But he also understood the heartbeat of the game, the fans. He visited clubs often, not just the top 6. He spoke with groundsmen, academy coaches, ticket office staff. Because while he scaled the Premier League to global heights, he never forgot the foundations. He knew the league's greatness came not just from its stars, but from its soul. He was also a fierce negotiator. When European clubs tried to strong-arm Premier League power, Scudamore stood firm. When domestic broadcasters tried to undercut the league's value, he walked away. He believed in the product. He believed in the league. And he made others believe, too. His first decade was transformative. Under his watch, the Premier League became more than a competition. It became a global brand. Stadiums modernized. Merchandising exploded. And most importantly, money flowed. But Richard didn't see money as the end goal. He saw it as the fuel. Fuel to improve training grounds. Fuel to raise player salaries. Fuel to fund community projects. He once said in a closed-door meeting, "Every pound we earn should echo back into the game." That philosophy earned him both admirers and critics. Some accused him of commercializing the game too far. Others praised him for saving English football from stagnation. He listened to all, but was moved by few. To Scudamore, the mission was clear: elevate the Premier League without losing its roots. And as the first chapter of his football journey closed, it was obvious. He hadn't just stepped into the game. He had changed it forever. If Chapter 1 was about building the Premier League into a business, then Chapter 2 is about turning that business into a global phenomenon. And Richard Scudamore wasn't just chasing expansion, he was orchestrating a revolution. In the early 2000s, the world was beginning to change. Broadband internet was growing. Cable networks were multiplying. Football had gone from a national sport to a global language, but it lacked structure. Scudamore saw that vacuum, and he filled it. His goal wasn't to make the Premier League bigger in England. It was to make it indispensable abroad. Scudamore pioneered the internationalization of the Premier League with an almost missionary zeal. He opened offices in Singapore and New York. He sent executives to Nigeria, India, and the Middle East. He didn't just sell broadcasting rights, he sold connection, local fan events, coaching programs, school partnerships. He made sure that when a kid in Jakarta wore a Liverpool jersey, they didn't just watch the club, they belonged to it. By 2013, the Premier League was broadcasting in 212 territories. Its matches were being aired in 643 million homes. And Scudamore didn't stop there. He understood something no one else in football truly grasped at that scale. That sport was entertainment, and entertainment needed a story. So he elevated the brand. No more grainy camera angles or dull halftime shows. He demanded cinematic production values. He encouraged behind-the-scenes content. He pushed clubs to adopt global digital strategies. And they did, because he made it worth their while. When the league signed a record $5.1 billion TV deal for 2016-2019, it wasn't just about numbers. It was about power. The Premier League was now the richest football league on earth and by far the most watched. With power, of course, came pressure. Scudamore found himself constantly navigating conflict. European clubs wanted a bigger slice of Champions League revenue. Domestic clubs bickered over revenue sharing. Traditionalists worried the game was losing its soul. But he held the line. He fought to maintain equal vote systems among clubs. He resisted the idea of European super leagues. He knew that the strength of the Premier League lay in its unpredictability, that on any given Saturday, Burnley could beat Arsenal, and the world would tune in. Scudamore's influence extended beyond contracts and TV cameras. He fostered club partnerships with overseas academies. He introduced Premier League live events in far-flung cities, where fans could gather to watch matches, meet former players, and feel part of the Premier League story. He believed that football wasn't just about 90 minutes, it was about identity, and identity could be global. Critics often accused him of turning football into a product, But in his eyes, football was always a product. It just hadn't been packaged right. And he never apologized for that. Because his version of the game reached more people, touched more lives, and united more strangers than ever before. As Chapter He, two of his leadership unfolded, Scudamore had turned the Premier League into more than just a league. He had turned it into the world's game. For all his success, Richard Scudamore's reign over the Premier League was far from universally praised. Great power often comes with deep criticism, and Scudamore faced both in equal measure. While many hailed him as the architect of football's golden era, others accused him of being its commodifier-in-chief, turning a sport into a supermarket. The money, they said, had changed everything. Under Scudamore's leadership, clubs became richer than ever before. With television rights breaking new records every cycle, owners, agents, and executives swelled their influence and their pockets. But fans, ticket prices climbed, matchday traditions grew thinner. Local communities, once the heartbeat of football culture, now stood outside stadiums built for tourists. It wasn't that Scudamore didn't notice, he just had to choose. "You can't please everyone," he once told a colleague, "but you can protect the institution." That institution was the Premier League, and for Scudamore, it had to evolve to survive. Still, tensions grew. Small clubs argued they were being left behind. The infamous Big Six began to pull further away, both financially and in influence. There were whispers of closed leagues, elite-only tournaments, and decisions made behind closed doors. The Premier League was growing, yes, but not always together. Scudamore was caught in the middle. In 2016, his proposal to distribute international TV rights more evenly among clubs caused uproar. The top clubs resisted, threatening breakaways. Mid-table and smaller clubs demanded equity. It was perhaps his most delicate battle and his most political. He managed to broker a compromise, but not without scars. That year, more than any other, he understood the paradox of leadership. The more success you build, the harder it becomes to hold it together. Then came the criticism around governance. As money flooded in, so did questions about regulation. How were club owners vetted? Were financial fair play rules being enforced? What role did the league have in addressing player welfare, racism, or gambling sponsorships? To many critics, Scudamore's silence on some of these issues was deafening, but his defenders argued he was a steward, not a savior. His job, they said, was not to fix football's moral compass, but to ensure its economic stability. And on that front, few could challenge him. And yet, even as he faced backlash, Scudamore kept showing up. Press briefings, fan forums, private meetings with supporters' trusts. He listened, if not always acted, but he never disappeared. Perhaps his greatest challenge came in the form of perception. To many traditionalists, he represented the corporate wave that had swallowed their beloved game. They longed for terraces and local derbies, not HD streams and Asian sponsors. Scudamore understood that pain, but he also knew nostalgia alone wouldn't fund a league. He believed in evolution, not erasure. You either adapt or you become history, he once said. It wasn't cold, it was honest. In the end, Richard Scudamore's legacy was never going to be simple. He stood at the crossroad of commerce and culture, and he chose a path few dared walk. He brought the Premier League to the world, but the cost of that ascent was a question he would carry forever. In saving football's future, did we lose part of its past? Richard Scudamore never had a farewell match. No final curtain call, no public parade through the tunnel of fame he helped construct. His departure from the Premier League in 2018 came as quietly as much of his work had unfolded. Without fireworks, but with deep, lasting consequence. For nearly 2 decades, he had shaped the destiny of English football, and when he left, he did so with little fanfare, letting the game speak for him, just as it always had. But those inside the game knew what they were losing. Club executives spoke of his strategic genius. Managers praised his consistency. Even skeptical journalists admitted, when Scudamore left, football's compass shifted. His final months in office were spent preparing the league for a future without him. He mentored incoming leadership. He held transition meetings with clubs. He wrote memos outlining ethical standards, financial frameworks, and crisis protocols. He wasn't just walking away, he was leaving a manual. But even with that level of detail, one thing couldn't be passed on: instinct. Scudamore's strength had always been his gut, his ability to read the room, to sense the rhythm of the industry. He had the rare ability to anticipate both risk and reward, to understand what fans might feel before they said it, and to calculate not just what a club wanted, but what the game needed. That type of leadership can't be replicated. It has to be earned and lived. So when the day came for Richard to officially step away, the boardroom at Premier League headquarters was filled with silence, more reverent than sad. He gave a short speech, thanked his team. Then he walked out. He didn't write a book. He didn't start a podcast. He didn't try to become a pundit. Instead, he disappeared into what he called the ordinary world. But his impact remained anything but ordinary. Post-Scudamore, the league continued to thrive. But the transitions were not without turbulence. The media landscape evolved rapidly. New debates emerged around sustainability, equity, and regulation. And many quietly wondered, what would Richard have done? He had created a structure that could stand on its own, but even structures tremble without the builder. And so, even in retirement, Scudamore's name was whispered in meetings, referenced, in documents sought out for advice. In private, he remained available. He took calls from club chairs. He offered insights to policymakers. He didn't seek influence, but he never truly let go. One story from a former assistant says it best. A year after stepping down, Richard returned to the Premier League offices, not for a meeting, but to drop off a handwritten note. It simply read, "You are custodians, not kings. Build wisely, serve quietly." That note now sits framed in the executive lounge. Because while Scudamore may be gone from the game's headlines, he's woven into its DNA. The roar of a Premier League crowd, the global kickoff times, the polished branding, the millions of kids wearing jerseys from cities they've never visited. All of it echoes the work of a man who never wanted the spotlight, but changed the stage forever. His exit wasn't loud, but his legacy is. Richard Scudamore never sought fame, but he shaped the most famous football league in the world. And though he left without a statue or a song, his legacy breathes through every part of the Premier League. He didn't just grow the league. He matured it, structured it, gave it a backbone, and more than anything, he gave it vision. A vision so enduring that even now, years after his exit, his influence continues to echo through the chants, the contracts, and the culture. It's easy to praise players, to remember goals and titles, but behind every stadium's roar is someone who built the stage. For 2 decades, Scudamore was that someone. When people talk about Premier League football today, they speak of the spectacle, the stars, the sold-out stadiums across continents. But few mention the strategist who quietly mapped it all, and that's fitting. Because Scudamore's brilliance was never in taking credit. It was in giving others space to shine. His job wasn't to be seen. It was to ensure the world kept watching. Even his critics, in hindsight, recognized that what he achieved wasn't luck or timing. It was craft, dedication, a relentless focus on the future, even when others clung to the past. Perhaps his greatest legacy is not what he built, but how he left it, with strength, with stability, and with a simple reminder, now framed on a wall: you are custodians, not kings. That phrase doesn't just sum up Richard Scudamore, it defines leadership. The Premier League will continue to evolve. New faces will rise, new deals will be made. But the DNA, its global heart, its commercial genius, its quiet balance between culture and commerce, will always bear his fingerprints. Because long after the final whistle of his tenure, Richard Scudamore remains what every great architect becomes, invisible to the crowd, but essential to the structure. And if you think this story ends here, wait for part 2. Because the legacy, it's still unfolding.